Oh, I hope you are well, and yeah, don't know how well my connection is going to be today. Unfortunately, I'm not on my usual internet connection, so hopefully, it will speak, of course, as well. But let's see how we get on. So today, I wanted to talk about a few questions that I've been asked over the last few weeks. In fact, the questions that I've been asked many times, and that's which language is the best to learn or the most useful to learn, or which one should I learn, or which one should I learn next. And it's one of those questions that it comes up very often. Now, my initial reaction to that question, my sort of gut reaction is, and so to try and say that one language is more worth learning than others in just an email where I've been asked which language should I learn, or a very quick sentence or question or comment, which language should I learn, it's actually not enough information for me to go on to even start to give advice. And to be honest, I need to really get to know each. So whenever I hear that question, my sort of thoughts always go to, well, can you tell me a bit more? Or at least can you have a think about why you want to learn? I mean, let me give you an example. When I was younger, I've got to be honest, I never really imagined that I would ever learn Macedonian. And language, maybe a bit more, depends with all of the and if you were to go on number of speakers, the types of work and business you can do, possibly it wouldn't be for those reasons a language that I would have chosen. But but I married into a community where that language is used, and for me it's the most important language that I speak, simply because I use it with family, I use it with friends, and I use it in the community, and it's the language I speak most on a daily basis. I use it way more than I use any other language. Important language for me to learn than Macedonian at the moment. So it's one of those things that if you were to ask just anyone on the street, the chances are they're not going to mention my home language as one of the languages you should learn, right? Now, I'm a big fan of learning community languages that you can realistically use. So for you, depending on where you are in the world, that could be many different languages. And I think that languages are things that if you want to speak them and you want to use them, then they need to be things that you can speak and use easily, and you can come into contact easily without having to make huge efforts. Because we all know that life gets busy and things get difficult, and making a huge effort to go out of the way to be involved in a language speaking community is a challenge. And so just that are totally out of your sphere of friends circles or family circles or community circles, whether that's a community online or offline. I mean, you can get really into Japanese, you could get really into these Korean series and Korean pop songs and stuff. You could get into groups where people all learn them. So you can create these groups as well. You can create them for yourself in terms of you enjoy and plug into existing communities, right? So that's definitely one thing. But what's tied to all of that is that there's community, there's something you can plug into, and also a real desire to speak and communicate with those people. So that could be based on common interests, shared goals, shared living spaces, community spaces. It could be things that it may even be religious based. You may have a temple or whatever it is that you enjoy being part of. It can be many different things that can drive that. And then, of course, people always talk about how many people speak a language, and also whether it's learning a language that not many people speak, relatively not many people speak, or whether it's you could very easily say, okay, well, actually, I've had very little call use Chinese, and so the language hasn't been a language that I've necessarily needed. But then other languages I have needed to use that have way fewer speakers. So I could never say that you are better off learning one over another. And also, if your goal is to be part of a community and to understand and interact with the community, then numbers really don't matter so much. If you learn languages just based on numbers, then you'll end up learning quite a desperate mix of languages. So you could end up learning, I don't know, Indonesian, Chinese, you might learn French, might learn Spanish, might learn whatever else. They're all sort of dotted around the wrong place, right? In my experience with work, I don't really very often see jobs. I don't think I've ever seen a job where they ask very mixed languages. Many global organizations are split into EMEA, which is Europe and Middle East and Africa, and then Asia, and they may have different Asian branches, and then North America, South America, and then maybe Australia, New Zealand, they may have separate ones. It would depend on each organization, but what you don't often see is the mix over of all of these different languages. So it could well be, that there are jobs where it tends to be that you go into a speciality. So yeah, it would be fairly unlikely in a professional environment that, unless you sort of get very specialized and very specific, for many roles, you would Spanish, German, and then English as well. It would be quite a lot towards it if you're actually interested in working in a specific region or for a specific region of the world, because then, of course, you want to be more valid. If we're talking about next languages, then there could be something else that's more interesting to do. Personally, I find it super rewarding to learn languages that are neighboring languages, other community languages, languages that are related to the languages that I speak, because I like to see the crossovers and where the bridges that meet these different communities, where they meet in the middle. And I find that to be actually one of the more rewarding things about learning languages. So my advice whenever I speak to somebody who's learning languages and they want to add one is often, look at languages that are similar or communities where they're close by that you could easily access that language and you can use it. So I think that this is the thing that I language, or something, a language where you feel that you want it. Now there are other things that you can do too. So you could also go down the route of supporting language community. You could indigenous languages. Now there's kind of mixed stories that I kind of have with these languages. I think it's good to learn these languages, of course. I think any language is good to learn. I also think it's good to resist the savior complex, if that makes sense. So sometimes we can feel that we're doing this and we're doing it because we're trying to save a language. In fact, many of the communities that I come across where they speak these languages, they often feel that what they're losing is not just the language, but also the community element, as in the language is no longer spoken within the confines of the community where they live. And so when people come in to learn them, yes, it can be an absolutely great thing to do, and it can be good for learners to kind of get together and have an online environment. But when we're not actually physically there, it can present its own challenges. What we can do potentially with that is raise awareness of the issues, help to be a repeater for a message that's important to those communities. Of course, we have our own views and our own feelings, and they're fine to have. I think also that these communities do have their own legitimate concerns that are possibly not always linguistically linked, and I think they actually do have the ability and the strength of voice and character to be able to to get those across themselves in their own words and from a position of real authenticity. And what we can do is help to potentially repeat those messages and help to give platforms to those messages. And this is where I see when we get involved in these languages, where we can help to give these opportunities, or additional opportunities, should I say, to. So yeah, this is kind of where I come from when I think about important languages, or languages that that people talk about. What should I learn? What should I add? Which language should I learn? I always think that the important thing is that it needs to have this sort of kernel of authenticity within you, that you feel that you need to learn this for a very valid reason for you, so that you then remain motivated. I was talking on an interview just yesterday with Azim, and one of the questions was about sort of this, and about learning languages. And I said, one of the things that people will often say is, I want to be able to speak a language or learn a language fluently. And that's all well and good. Wanting to do something is great. Doing it is often a very different thing, because that's where the work comes in, right? That's where the slog comes in. You have to sit down and go through it and learn it and carry on doing it for longer than a few weeks or months. It will take, a fair chunk of time. So when I think of this, I often am reminded of a time when I was in university, and one of my friends was doing a PhD in mathematics, and he said, when he said, that soon changed. So because if you have a language, if that's your initial goal and that doesn't change, you're in for a very difficult ride, because spending years with the subject matter for either a PhD, for learning language, otherwise you may well stop. And of course, that has its own implications, and it has its own impact on you as an individual, and how you feel about yourself, and also the language, and also your ability to maybe do other things. So these things all have a knock-on effect, and they don't happen in a vacuum. So I think when it comes to picking a language, my advice would be not to necessarily go to somebody random on the internet and say, which language should I study? Which is the most important language? Because the answer to that is, there is no best language to learn. There is no is better than another, or more valid than another. And I mean that with complete sincerity. There really isn't. The language that's most important for you to learn is the one that most belongs. So that's kind of where I land on this. And whilst it's all fine to have conversations with people, and to discuss and to talk about motivations and to talk about reasons, I think that it is also important to remember that that's all those things are. They're conversations. And I would definitely not go to somebody and say, which language should I use, and then just use that as if they come back with a random answer, use that as the guide. For sure, I've been asked very specific questions that I can definitely say, okay, in my experience, this has been the list of languages. So people have asked me in the past, which languages have you most used? And I can say, well, okay, in my experience, I've most used for work, after English, French, German, Spanish have been the most common, possibly then Italian. But then after those languages, the ones that I tend to be tended to be sought after in the work that I was doing were actually Dutch and Swedish. Possibly because there are few English speakers who speak those languages to a degree where they can actually work in them. And of course, when I was doing those kinds of jobs, I was talking to people who were living in those countries. And so when you're living in a country, you can say, okay, well, the Netherlands and Sweden, they speak very English, but if they're at home and they want help, or they want to do something, they don't necessarily want to do that in a language. They're kind of picking up the phone in their home in Sweden or the Netherlands, and expecting to get service in their home language. So that's kind of, I think, where that came in. Also, they've got like big businesses that are attached to, from those countries that have gone international, and so yeah, you need teams that speak them. So they've been the answers that I've given and tend to give. And also, if you go for a kind of a niche language, there aren't that many British students who study Swedish or even Dutch. And so if you do that, then the jobs that come up, of course, you're going to be in pole position because you're going to be quite rare, and so it'd be easier to find them. So sometimes it's actually a surprise which language will help you in your career, in your job, in your studies even. I often find that the community thing for me personally is the most important thing. Which ones can I actually use without making any effort at all? And that answer will vary from person to person. It could be a sign language, it could be indigenous language, it could be a language spoken by only a few thousand people, or but it really depends on you and depends on your experience and where you are and where you travel and what you do and your friends and your family and everything. So there are so many things that go on there. And I hope that sort of talking through this is a help. If you are thinking of which language to study next, maybe have a think through all of these things that I raised, and or how it helped to inform you, or how it helped to give you some clarity. I'm really always glad to get the inspiration for these chats. And now I'm going to go to the questions to see if I've got any questions here. I hope that the internet connection is holding for you. Mandarin, Chinese. Mandarin's often mentioned. I've never had cause to use it. It's really strange. I've had can indeed ask a question, yes. So feel free to ask a question. I will get to as many as I can, as quickly as I can. So the Spanish, Mandarin, or French would be useful. A lot of Chinese immigrants, Japanese or Chinese, if you like cultures. French, you like serious movies, or Quebec. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, they could be reasons why people learn languages. Absolutely, absolutely. I would love to learn a Native American language, but it's not easy, to say the least. No, absolutely not. No, it depends which one you want to learn. It depends if you've got a community around you that you can interact with, and also important to sort of reiterate this. I think also interact with these communities on terms. Some of these languages come with quite a lot of historical baggage. For many indigenous peoples around the world, and some really quite horrible things that have happened have left quite a scar on communities. They've really left their mark, and so when we approach these, it's good to sort of to really take the whole thing in. It's a little bit different when it comes to a language like English or French or something else, just because the languages have been adopted or used, or even the languages that have been forced on peoples around the world over centuries. And so the feelings are quite different. And I think that whenever we learn a language, there's kind of there's a lot more that goes on under the skin of the language. So it's really important, I think, that whichever one we learn, we try and understand the background. And to do that, actually, there's a lot less talking and a lot more listening involved. Be passionate and as understanding as we possibly can. We may hear things we don't like. So yeah, things that are difficult to hear, things that go against the teachings that we've had at school. Things that I've heard learning some languages about historical events that I had been taught differently, but seen through different eyes. It's actually quite humbling to go through that experience. Not even talk about just indigenous or endangered languages. I mean, I went through this experience just learning Czech, how Czech people view the Second World War compared to how it's taught in the West is very different. So I would absolutely say it's worth doing it just for that. I know many collections, complicated structures, but I can't use them when I write. I'm speaking in both English and German. Persian native speaker. Okay. Need a cure for it. A cure to start speaking. I think starting to speak is one of those things that. Okay. Speaking is something that requires a lot of practice. You need to sort of force some of those structures into your spoken language, but do it over a long period of time until it becomes natural. It's a time thing. It really is a time thing. It takes time to get used to it, to feel confident with it. The Persian view of World War II was intrigued with the Second World War at school in the United Kingdom. Was obviously very, UK focused and not at all what you imagine. Personally, I think the best language to learn is one you'll learn consistently and consistency is the key to success. You're right, Timothy. Absolutely. You'll probably make the most progress and get the most satisfaction. Absolutely. But I have family in and can't stay on. I wish you a fruitful week. Okay, thank you very much, lovely. Indeed, I appreciate it. Good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Walaikum assalam from Morocco. Nice to see you. Currently in Beijing, China. Wow. Have a good Christmas, Richard. Thank you very much for ringing it. But you're right. I'm currently considering learning Manchu language. Fantastic, Abdel. That's really good, Abdel. It's a great thing to be able to do because it's really disappearing and getting suppressed locally. I'll probably start translating a Manchu language teaching book from Chinese to English for to save the language. Absolutely, remember to talk to people. I mean, sometimes it can be quite complicated to talk to people as well. So some communities in some parts of the world actually feel quite threatened when we learn the languages, and that can be for many reasons too. There is no one rule for a number of these languages that keep in mind when we talk about these languages. I think, I think it's nice that you have this passion to do this. Okay, I don't think questions there for me. So I think that when it comes to this question, I think that it's really important that you decide yourself what your situation is, and you maybe, if it helps, to even write things out and to kind of make notes on your reasons for learning a language and how you've got it, the resources you've got, the people around you, and all these kinds of things. I think it's very important that we are quite conscious. Let me see. Can you speak Persian? Do you know Persian? Unfortunately, no, I don't speak Persian. I would love to learn it properly at some point. I have studied a little, but not enough to speak it. I know a number of Persian words because I speak, but I don't speak it. I do speak Turkish, but not Persian. And I know a number of Persian words in Turkish, so that's why I have these Persian words quite often. Hopefully I'll be back to Persian at some point soon. Right. So, I mean, if there are any other questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, we may just have half an hour chat today. I want to be careful that I don't sort of cause myself too much. Thank you so much for joining me and for your time, for giving me company. How do you feel your skills in a certain language aren't they used to be? Yes, I mean, ability and used to be. Yes, I mean, ability and skills in languages will change over time, whether that's you get rusty, you're not used to talking about certain things. So that does happen over time. I had that with Italian when I finished university. So I did Italian university, and then I didn't really use it for work for a couple of years. And then I started to have to use it for work. And when I started using it, I had a lot of Spanish influence on my Italian. And so my accent was very Spanishified. My grammar, my vocabulary was very Spanish. I'd just been living in Spain and yeah, mainly Spanish, but I was studying at Spanish university in Spanish and studying that my foreign language was German at the university, and I was studying business, and my marketing courses were all in Spanish, and then I had German business classes. Went to German business classes that I went. My Italian had been impacted by it, but it's quite weird after I'd say a few weeks, maybe a month or so, of using Italian professionally for work. It was amazing how quickly it came back, and one of my work colleagues was Italian as well. So I got to use it with him quite a lot, and he helped me to regain Italian. I've been through phases like this with a number of languages through over the years, and it's quite annoying the whole time. It's just you'll have to speak, and then you realize, oh, actually, I've not spoken this for a while now. Because clearly you can't keep that many languages just in your head thinking that you use this. This is one of the other reasons why I always like to say I like people to make their own decisions as to how well I speak a language. I don't really care too much. And it's also why I always talk about the language I've studied and not the number of languages I speak or how well I speak them necessarily. I mean, there are some languages clearly that I'm very, very comfortable speaking and doing many, many things in. But at the same time, it doesn't really matter to me what anybody thinks of my languages. I mean, what anybody thinks of my languages, use them for work. I've used them for my private life. I've spent over a quarter of my life away from my home country. So, I mean, it's quite interesting how often do you use italki to practice speaking. Actually, I use italki fairly regularly. So this week I had an Estonian class on Monday, and I'm going to have another tomorrow. And I had a Greek conversation class on Friday, and then I have other classes that I do as well. But not necessarily all on italki. I have other classes that I go to in other conversation groups. I go to some Cornish, some of my languages I go for, and then sometimes I do ones for some language I've studied in the past. Yep, so now and disappear. I can feel it's not doing so well. So I will speak to you all next week. Take care, and yeah, let me know if you have any questions or ideas or things you want me to talk about, and I'll be looking out in the comments. Speak to you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye. Speak to you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.